Well, listen, it is that time again. That's right. Listen, we are here for Roughing It. Why? Because we understand that when we come into this space and place, listen, we come to have our relationships empowered, to have our relationships maximized, to have something different than what we have been experiencing up till now. And so I just want to thank you so much for you being right here in this space and place. Listen, I want to thank you for making sure that, listen, you just didn't come into this space and place, listen, by yourself. Listen, you came into this space and place with someone else. Why did you come with someone else? Because you understood that coming into this place meant that you were going to have not just a better relationship on your side, but listen, you were going to have a better relationship on their side. And with us having a relationship that is better for the both of us or all of us, we know that, listen, we're going to be in a better place. So listen, why don't we go ahead and take the opportunity to begin to let people know that, listen, this is the place where you want to come. So begin to go ahead and invite people, listen, into this space and place. That's right. Listen, we want to let them know that, listen, this is where relationships are maximized. That's right. Listen, your relationship is maximized. My relationship is maximized. And so, listen, we want to go ahead and begin to bring people into this space. So if you are on YouTube, I want you to share the link. Listen, if you are on Facebook, I want you to share this to your page. But no matter where you may be, no matter where you are, I want to make sure that, listen, you are taking the opportunity to see that what God has for you is not just for you alone, but it is for everyone else that is in your circle. And so, listen, if you are on YouTube, I want to make sure that you subscribe to our channel. That's right. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Listen, hit the bell icon that is there so that you can go ahead and get those notifications when we go live. If you are here on Facebook, I want you to be sure to like our page. Make sure that you follow us. Why? Because listen, we know that this is what we want to do. We want to like, we want to share, and we want to follow. That's right. Listen, we want to like, we want to share, and we want to follow. And so, listen, I thank you for going ahead and being here today and enjoying what I believe is going to be another piece to helping us solve the puzzle of resolving conflicts in our relationships. That's right. Resolving conflicts in our relationships. And because, listen, that's what we're going to do today. I just thank you so much for being here. I thank you so much for, listen, being able to not only be here, but listen, if you're watching this on the rebroadcast, then listen, I tell you to do the same thing. Make sure that you share this. If you're watching this after it is over and you say, listen, I believe that this will help my friend. I think this will help my co-laborer, my neighbor. This will help my co-worker. If you believe that at the end of this, that this has moved the needle for you, then I ask that you please share it so it can move the needle for someone else. And so listen, I am therapist and pastor Marcus Ruffin. Glad to be here again with you again here on this great, wonderful Thursday. Now, if you have been here with us in this particular segment of where we've been talking about resolving conflicts in relationships, that's what I've been teaching on. This is part 2 of this particular series. And so, listen, I want you to know that as we are looking at resolving conflict in relationships, listen, I want to bring this slide up to you. And I think that this will really be important. So notice now, when neighbors feud, lovers quarrel, or nation's war, the predictable remedy prescribed by voices of reason is communication. Listen, it's worth reading again. When neighbors feud, lovers quarrel, or nations war, the predictable remedy prescribed by the voices of reason is communication. And so here, when we are looking at conflict in relationships, we understand that, listen, doesn't matter what type of relationships we're talking about, whether we're talking about friends, neighbors, family members, we're talking about personal, professional. I believe that what we will cover in this segment, in this series, listen, will apply to all relationships. Now, listen, we always like to start off with a scripture passage. Here's why. Because I understand that when you and I talk about resolving conflict in relationships, as much as we can deal with the head and the emotions, and we can talk about the body as it relates to body language and all these other components, the reality is that relationships are spirit, soul, and body. Relationships are threefold. And so we can talk about all the techniques and we could talk about all the principles, but I'm telling you, if there isn't a resolve in your spirit to really resolve conflict, then you will only get so far before you run into obstacles that are beyond the techniques, beyond the principles. And here's why. Because if you have a critical spirit, if you have a hateful spirit, if it is down within your DNA that this is who you have chosen to become, then I promise you, the things that we talk about will only work to a certain extent until you have resolved it within you that, listen, this is who I want to be. And the techniques and the principles will help to shape and mold me to become that which I have designed to be, I have resigned to be. And so therefore, I want you to see this particular passage. It says here in Matthew 18, I'm looking at this in 15 through 16, the Message translation. It says, if a fellow believer hurts you, that's right, listen, if a fellow believer hurts you, go and tell him, work it out between the two of you. If he listens, notice now, if he listens, you've made a friend. Now, I want you to see even the next passage. It says, if he won't listen, take one or two others along, so the presence of witness will keep things honest and try again. Now, here's what I think that is so key about this, that when we're looking at this particular passage, it's talking about that sometimes things aren't worked out the first time you and I go to resolve, you and I go to address it, you and I go to work it out, that there are sometimes things that are done over a series of events, a series of approaches, a series of conversations. And so he says, listen, that you and I have to have a resolve that we're going to work this out. This is something that can be worked out. And then we are going to decide that, listen, if we need to bring in some other objective parties, we're going to do just that so that we can make sure that we bring this to a resolve. Let me tell you, spiritually speaking, unresolved issues that you and I do not bring closure to, you and I do not bring finality to, those things usually have a tendency to carry over into other relationships. They have a tendency to follow us into other areas of our lives. And so sometimes people say, well, listen, I need to move spaces. I need to move to another geographical area. I need to move to another house. And the reality is that if you're taking that same unresolved issue and it has tied itself to your spirit, then I promise you, you're going to end up in another place finding those same conflicts existing in other relationships because we didn't resolve things at a spiritual level. And so listen, as we are going forward, notice now, last week we talked about what is conflict. And we said that, listen, conflict simply deals with disagreement. Now, if you missed last week, you had to go back and pick up part 1 of this. But we talked about how conflict is simply disagreement. But then here was the thing that was probably most essential. Being able to really resolve, listen, what's my comfort with conflict? What is my comfort with conflict? What is my comfort with disagreement? And so therefore, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about what we addressed last week, but I just want to highlight that there is a connection between what we're talking about today. And so today, listen, when we're here talking about resolving conflict in relationships, the reality is that some of us come to this table with a certain level of knowledge, a certain level of information, and I really want to be able to really give some clarity between conflict management and conflict resolution. I believe that both of them are important, but I want to distinguish the difference between the two. And so here when we talk about conflict, notice now, when we talk here about conflict management, it is the process now. Remember, it is the process of limiting the negative aspects of conflict while increasing the positive aspects of conflict. It is being able to limit the negative and to increase the positive. It really has to do with this whole process, this navigation in which we move through the conflict itself. But as much as that is important, sometimes if we do not move to a place of where we are going to resolve the conflict, we may navigate through the process, but stay in the process a lot longer than necessary. And so here, where we're talking about conflict resolution has to deal with the reduction or determination of the conflict itself. Now, remember, we're talking about conflict resolution in relationships. These are the relationships that matter. These are the relationships that are important to you and I. These are the relationships that you and I will say that they matter in our lives. And the reason why I highlight that and the reason why I point that out is because you can hear relationships and think about associations. You can think about acquaintances. You can think about friends. You can think about that coworker that you have a real good vibe with versus that coworker that you all are always at odds. And my whole goal and point here is that when we are looking at conflict resolution and conflict management, it is so that you and I can be able to recognize how you and I are going to do the work that's necessary, because the relationship means that much more to us. See, if the relationship doesn't have significance and meaning and value and importance, I promise you, you probably won't do the work that's necessary because you don't value it as much. And so I want you to be able to recognize that when we're talking about conflict management, conflict resolution, that it is simply the opportunity for people, notice now, to better understand the wants and the needs of the other person. Listen, it's an opportunity for growth, for expansion, for improvement. When you and I are talking about conflict resolution, it is so that you and I can move to a place that where we have more that is working for us than that which is working against us. Now, it doesn't mean that all issues are resolved and that we don't have to continue to sometimes work through issues over a period of time. Remember, the scripture passage, it says that sometimes you have to try again. And there are some things that will take on a life and shape and form of itself. The reason why is because you change, I change, our neighbors change, our friends change. And so who we were dealing with sometimes as a teenager is not who we're dealing with as an adult. who we're dealing with, at the point that maybe they were in their 20s or 30s is not necessarily who we're dealing with when they're in their 40s and their 50s. And so the reality is that because there is evolvement, there is growth, and there is development that is happening in our relationships, the reality is that because those things are occurring on all sides, it's occurring on our side, it's occurring on their side, it's occurring between us, that therefore conflict management and conflict resolution may be things that we're constantly having to kind of cultivate and develop and utilize, not because we have ongoing issues, but because we have ongoing growth and we have ongoing development. And we've got to work through those things as we are growing and developing and changing along the way. And so here, when you talk about conflict resolution, or you talk about conflict management, there are really four major ways that you and I find that when it comes to conflict resolution or conflict management. And so it is also this recognition, let me say this, it is the recognition that conflict, notice now, will be inevitable. But listen, as long as it is handled appropriately, efficiently, and skillfully, conflict will always work for our good. And that last one, skillfully, is the part where you and I have to learn how to manage, how to resolve conflict. That does not come simply because we're in a good relationship. That does not come simply because we say that we have found, quote, our soulmate, that we now have our BFF. It doesn't kind of fall in place simply because these persons have come in our lives. But you and I have to understand what it looks like to be efficient, to be skillful, so that we can keep these people in our lives. Now, listen, if you have questions about what it is that we're discussing, you can put that on the YouTube, or you can put that on the Life Empowerment Church page here on Facebook. And I would see those questions so that we can address those in real time, because we want to make sure that you're getting the kind of answers that are actually scratching where you itch. And so here, listen, there are four major ways. Now, I promise you, I probably won't get to all four today, but I do want to at least cover three. That is my goal. And so here, when we talk about these four major ways in which we are managing conflict, hopefully with the goal of resolving conflict, it is being able to understand that this first one that is mentioned here, it is the passive, notice now, it is the passive conflict management. It is the passive conflict management. Now, here's one of the things that I want to be able to tell you is that when we talk about, listen, when we talk about this conflict management or this passive style, it is the reality that, listen, with this passive style, with this particular mode of operation, it is important that not only this one, but even with the other ones that we will discuss, that this usually falls into our personality style, the personality traits that we have. When you and I begin to recognize that you and I, remember, spirit, soul, and body, part of that which is within our soul is our personality. This is who we are born as. This is what comes with the package of when we are in these bodies. We have the kind of brain that we have. This is not always contingent upon birth order. This is not always contingent upon gender. This is contingent upon you being a human being, and therefore every human being has a personality. And so here, when we talk about the passive conflict management style, passivity, or the passive person, listen, this is the kind of person that takes emotional pressure, Because you have to remember, when there's a disagreement, when there's a conflict, there's pressure that comes with that. And so when there's this pressure at that moment, this is the kind of person that will hold on to it. Sometimes this is the person that doesn't really know how to kind of manage it internally. So they're going to often have problems managing it externally. And often you will find that goes along with this passive conflict management style is that this is the kind of person that has a lack of disclosing thoughts and feelings. Let me tell you, this is the kind of thing that can lead to ulcers. This is the kind of thing that can lead to mood swings. Sometimes when we are looking at people and we are experiencing these kind of ups and downs, we may not associate it with the fact that they have a problem mismanaging. And it's not so much the issue, it's not so much that we are talking about something that can sometimes be uncomfortable. It's the fact that internally, listen, they are on their own emotional roller coaster. And so therefore, when you talk about the passive conflict management style, listen, they will sometimes allow others to achieve for them. They will sometimes go and have their needs violated. Listen, sometimes they will be dishonest just to keep the peace. Listen, you may hear this and you may know somebody that fits into this category. You may even say that you fit into this category. But here's the reality. Everybody that is born in this world will have a personality that will give its way to one of these particular dynamics. And so this person that we're talking about is the passive one. Now listen, this is the kind of person that will yield to others in order to, quote, maintain peace. Matter of fact, one of the statements that you will often hear from persons with this personality, passive conflict management style, is that, listen, I just want to keep the peace. That's what they say. Listen, I just want to keep the peace. But the reality is that in their efforts to keep the peace, it is often at the cost of their own peace. They will, listen, see the relationship as being more important than them being right. And so sometimes they're seen as people pleasers. Now, here's the great thing about persons that will have this particular passive conflict management style. This is a good thing, actually. Listen, they will minimize their difference of opinion to the point that their own personal goals and values are forfeited. Now, as bad as that can sound, the reality is that in every relationship, there's a give and take. In every relationship, there's some degree of sacrifice. And so because this is like a core piece to who they are, you will find that this is kind of the motivation behind why they may be passive. But the reality on the other side of this coin is that, listen, this can be risky. Why? Because in order to protect the other person's interests, they're usually doing this at the expense of their own interests. And because they're doing this at the expense of their own interests, they do not express their own feelings and opinions. And they will sometimes prefer to just listen to others versus express themselves. And this is why sometimes they can be very confusing because you don't know what they're thinking, you don't know where they're coming from, you don't know really where they are. And so therefore, they can also have this inability to say no because they're thinking so much about the other person and not doing anything that is going to really jeopardize the relationship. They will sometimes have a problem with saying no. And so, granted, you know, everybody has their limits. Everybody has their place of where they say enough is enough, you know, and I can't go any further. But the reality is that this person will often adapt to this win-lose posture They would rather lose, see the person win for the sake of the relationship. Now, here's another good thing about this passive personality is that, listen, there are certain times you and I can all agree, regardless of the personality type that we may have, that there are certain times when giving in is the preferred choice. See, when the issue itself is of little consequence and the relationship is obviously more important than the disagreement, then it is wise, listen, to be able to give in. Not because you are selling yourself short, but you're saying, listen, the relationship means that much more. And so therefore, I want to make sure that I do what is in the best interest of the relationship. And so therefore, the problem sometimes here is the difficulty in knowing when to give in and when to stand firm. And so that's the passive personality, conflict management style. Now, let's move on here to this next one, which is the aggressive management style, the aggressive conflict management style. Now, remember, everybody is born with a personality by default. One of these three, hopefully we get to all three today, is one that you and I have a tendency to go towards. Now, you can learn, you can grow, you can develop, and you can manage some of these tendencies a lot better than maybe what you did in times past. But the reality is that to some degree, there will still sometimes be a little tug of war because by default, you want to go to one of these three directions. And so when you hear the passive person, it is not a downgrade to you. It is not a negative towards you. It's just a reality. And just like all of these that we will talk about, there's pros and there are cons. There are some good things, there are some bad things. And so it is being able to recognize those things for what they are and be able to manage them. Because to some degree, you won't necessarily get rid of them. You may become better at managing them so that you can have a better navigation and conflict management. But remember, it is not just about managing conflict. We're talking about resolving conflict. And so therefore, this is why when we talk about the aggressive conflict management style, this is the person that is quick to release their thoughts and their feelings. And they're so quick to do this that it is often without regard to the consequences of their verbiage, of their thoughts, the impact that it will have on the other person. And so therefore, when you have this aggressive conflict management style, sometimes they have a tendency to have explosions. Now, often these explosions are outwardly experienced, but let me tell you, they can have inward explosions, and more often than not, it is that inward explosion that leads to the outward explosion. And the same way that the passive person has to manage their internal dynamics, the aggressive person has to manage his or her internal dynamics so that, listen, we're talking about conflict management, but we're also talking about conflict resolution. And sometimes the person that we have to manage first before we manage anybody else is ourselves. Let me say that again. Sometimes the person that we have to manage first before we manage anyone else is ourselves. And so remember, in one of these teachings, we talked about the importance of self-awareness. If I do not have self-awareness, then I am going to be privy often to what is happening around me and being controlled by what is happening around me instead of being aware of what is happening around me so that I can control my responses to what is happening, whether it is what's happening in me or it is what is happening outside of me. And so here, when you talk about the aggressive personality or the aggressive conflict management style, this is the person that, listen, will have a tendency to tell you and I what we ought to think. Sometimes they will make choices for the other person because they believe that they know what's best. They believe that they know what is better for you and I. Listen, sometimes they will even blame the other persons for their own mistakes because they have a hard time sometimes looking at themselves and owning their part to the problem. Now, remember, everybody in every personality dynamic will have blind spots. By default, you and the passive person has blind spots. The aggressive person will have blind spots. And here, as the aggressive person, they have a tendency to lean towards this win or lose methodology. The aggressive conflict management person, listen, is very opinionated. They will tell you their opinions. They think that you should know their opinions because their opinions are best. I mean, why wouldn't you want to know these great thoughts that I have, these great ideas that I have? And so the reality is that when you talk about the aggressive personality, they don't mind telling you what's exactly on their mind. But here's the problem. Sometimes they can tell you what's on their mind, even to the point that it hurts the other person's feelings. Now, remember, going back to the scripture passage that we started off with, and it said that, listen, if you have hurt somebody, it is our responsibility to try to fix what we've done wrong, to fix what has gone amok. And so this passive person, the aggressive person, can do damage. And so the common phrase of the aggressive communicator is, I'm right and you're wrong. Listen, the common aggressive communicator will tell you that I'm right and you're wrong. And so with this kind of win-lose dynamic, listen, they will assume that everything should be seen as right or wrong. Listen, for this reason, listen, they will see things as black or white. There's very little room or space for there to be gray area. And so out of that, their difficulty sometimes is flexibility, because flexibility can be seen as a weakness because things are either black or white. There isn't really this gray area. And so energy should be expanded. Notice now, energy should be expended not in trying to find the common ground, but in trying to convince the other person the wrongness of their viewpoint. Listen, this is what they will listen. They're saying, my way of thinking is right. My ideas are what should be implemented. My way of doing things is the right way. And so therefore, listen, they're going to spend time not in trying to negotiate. They're going to spend time in trying to convince you that their viewpoint is right. Now, sometimes, just like in all of these personalities that we will talk about, these conflict management styles, you can have somebody that's kind of right around the middle, but you can also have somebody that is to the far extreme, either the left or the right. And simply because you have that, you will sometimes find that people with this aggressive personality can go to the extent of trying to convince the person so much that their point is right, is that sometimes it can lead to physical force. Sometimes it can lead to threats, intimidation, sometimes even silence. You know, they say silence is golden until it's hurting you. And so silence can be used as a weapon. Sometimes the verbiage and how they're trying to manipulate or communicate in such a way to persuade you in their direction. Sometimes the volume at which they're speaking, they can point out past failures. Remember, they often resort to a win-lose methodology. And so it can become this kind of you against me or me against you all. And so therefore, they may want to pull rank, or sometimes there's this sort of one man up, on you. And so this aggressive personality can, like I say, go to the extremes. But here's the good thing about the aggressive personality. They are clear about what they consider to be maybe their values, their standards, why they are kind of going the direction that they're going, that they can be really clear in that regard. And so the thing here is that you and I, when we are in a conversation and we're having to negotiate and we're having to manage conflict, being clear about where we stand and why we stand where we stand is often very important for us to resolve the conflict. And so if we don't really know where we're coming from and we're just looking to sometimes feel better, we're just sometimes looking for things to be better, but not really clear on what that looks like, that does not help the situation at hand. And so this is one of the good things about the aggressive personality or the aggressive conflict management style. But like I said, this person really believes that their way is the right way, even to the point that, listen, they will say that even God agrees with what I'm thinking. God agrees with what I'm saying because they are just that totally convinced. And so therefore, when you and I are talking about the passive person, we talk about the aggressive person. Remember, these are defaults. You and I are going to fall within one of these three. You and I cannot get out of this. And like I said before, you can learn how to do better. You can become more aware of these blind spots and these areas of default, and you can really manage them and get a better grasp of them. But to think that they're just going to all of a sudden vanish is really misleading. But you can do better when they show up. You can do better when they begin to present themselves and you're like, okay, let me look a little further into this before I get a little off kilter, because I recognize that I have a tendency with this particular personality or with this particular conflict management style. And so here, when we look at this next one, talking about the passive aggressive conflict management style, the passive aggressive, this is when you and I are talking about the kind of person that, listen, they hold it in till it can't be held in anymore. Things will often get so mounted up within them that it can lead to attacks with the other person. Sometimes it may not be the persons who were guilty of the previous argument. And so because they may carry this from one relationship to the next relationship, by the time you're engaging with them, they may be a little on edge. And because they may be a little on edge, you're getting a little of the rollover, a little bit of the leftover from their last conflict. And so now you're getting a double dose. You're getting like the compound effect, and you're like, where is this coming from? Like, the issue does not rise to this level. And it's because sometimes this person, the passive aggressive person, has challenges with being able to unload that and to come into the next relationship and be free, so that we're operating from an even balance. And so here's the interesting thing about the passive person, or the passive aggressive person, may I say, is that, listen, those two methods we talked about before, with the win-lose strategy or the avoidance method, listen, they will sometimes have a combination of these two in how they will manage conflict. And so instead of them outright stating their feelings, listen, this is the kind of person that may mutter underneath their breath. Listen, they may communicate in subtle, indirect ways, hoping that you pick up hoping that you will sometimes recognize that they have a problem with you, but they never said anything, they never communicated, but they just carry this attitude, and you're trying to figure out, well, what's going on, but because they have this avoidance kind of tendency, and so therefore they may not outright tell you like the aggressive person, and they will sometimes hope that you just pick it up. This is the kind of person, listen, with this communication style, will sometimes use facial expressions that don't exactly correlate with how they're feeling. Listen, they can be upset with you and be smiling, be engaging, be talking with you. And then you find out days later, hours later, weeks later, that they're upset, they're seething on the inside, and you're trying to figure out where in the world is this coming from? I mean, we were just doing this, we've done that, we've hung out with da-da-da-da-da-da, and the reality is that this person can really mask what's going on the inside, yet appear in a facade that everything is okay, connect in some way, engage in some way, but yet they are still dealing with internal issues that have not been resolved in the relationship. And because that kind of thing occurs, they can be passive aggressive. Listen, they can be avoiding disagreement. Avoiding disagreement assumes the differences are always bad because they might lead to a relational breakdown. Let me say that again. Avoiding disagreement assume that differences are always bad because they might lead to a relational breakdown. You remember the passive person, right, is looking at the relationship and not wanting to really do anything that will infringe upon the relationship, even sometimes to their own detriment. And so this person, the passive aggressive person, may also have some of those same tendencies in which they don't want to really mess up the relationship. Yet at the same time, they want things to be better. They don't want to stay in pain. They don't want to stay in this hurting manner. They don't want you to continue to offend them, but they are sometimes wrestling with trying to figure out how to actually get that out so that you all can stay in relationship while at the same time they are treated better within the relationship. And so there's sometimes a tendency to avoid conflict. But let me tell you, listen, this will only create a weak and superficial relationship. Listen, and as much as this may be difficult, and this is why over this teaching series where we're talking about how to resolve conflicts. Notice now, how to resolve conflicts in relationship. We're going to be really talking about how do we strategically, efficiently, skillfully get there. And so we're not talking about all of those things today because I want you to understand what does it look like for you right now. Because when you understand where you are, it helps you to understand where somebody else may be so that you and I can both get to a better place. Because when we learn together and we can grow together. Let me say that again. When we can learn together, we can grow together. And so the passive aggressive person can sometimes, listen, postpone important decisions because emotionally they're in this space in which they're not thinking as logically and as rationally. And so they're just not in a good space. And it's one thing to not be in a good space and to recognize I don't need to make certain decisions at this time. But it's a whole nother thing when I allow something like that to linger and I am postponing decisions that have deadlines and they have times in which they need to be addressed, but I keep putting them off because I'm not dealing with really where the problem lies. And the problem often lies in me, but until I can address that, I can't address the we. And so therefore, important decisions can be postponed. And just like the passive person, listen, issues can continue bubbling up. Listen, sometimes things will never go addressed. Listen, remember I said that there's some people in these personality management, conflict management styles that are far to the right, they're far to the left. And listen, there are people, listen, that will hold grudges. Listen, there will go years. And you will be trying to figure out what in the world is wrong. And they don't tell you. And I'm telling you that therefore, when you allow this kind of personality conflict management style to linger, I'm telling you, your relationships will always remain at a surface level. And here's the reality. Avoiding conflict at all costs is often a sign of weakness and insecurity within the relationship. And so therefore, this is why next week, when we come back here on Thursday, we're going to be talking about this assertive conflict management resolution style. That's right. Listen, the assertive conflict resolution management style that we all have to learn how to become efficient at doing, become skillful at implementing. So it doesn't matter if you're in the passive, the aggressive, or the passive aggressive. All of us have to learn. This is not something that we come to the table knowing how to do by nature. This is what we learn how to do by nurture. Somebody brings us into the space and place that allows us to really learn what this looks like. How does this work? So that I can work through my own internal issues while I'm also working through the external issues, the problems, the conflict that is happening in the relationship. And when we can all be aware of what's happening internally, as well as what's happening externally, we put ourselves in a much better space and place for us to be able to be assertive and to have not just conflict management, but to have conflict resolution. And so therefore, this is why I say to you here, and let me just bring this up on the screen, that listen, 10% of conflict is due to a difference of opinion. 90% is due to the wrong tone of voice. And so when you and I understand that, listen, when it comes to conflict, that listen, part of it is figuring out what's going on with me. The other part is figuring out what is exactly the problem itself. And once we are able to move in that continuum, I promise you, we get to a place that where we are therefore able to move to a space and place that where we're resolving conflict. We're not just managing conflict, but we're resolving. We got to manage it until we can resolve it. But the goal is that we would move to a place of resolving it, because that is how you and I continue to stay in the relationships that are most meaningful, most valuable, and significant. And so therefore, it doesn't matter if it's personal or professional relationships. Communication bridges the gap. And so listen, I want you all to know that I think that, listen, we have learned some things today that will help us move the needle further in being able to have the kind of relationships that make a difference, and to continue to stay in those relationships because they have value, they have significance, and they have meaning. Now listen, this is only part 2 of where we've talked about resolving conflict in relationships. Listen, this is only part 2. And so we're going to be picking up here next week as we talk about the assertive conflict resolution style, personality. It's not really a personality. It's really a style that we learn, because personalities are what we're born with, and nobody's born with being assertive. Now, I promise you, those aggressive conflict management styles and personalities. They believe that they're being assertive. And so that's what they believe. But we're going to learn some things about what real assertiveness looks like. And so listen, if this has been a blessing to you, if this has been really, if this has really moved the needle, this has really served you in some manner, listen, here's what I'm asking. I'm asking that you would support what has happened today. And so listen, whether you are using Cash App, you see that information there on the screen, LifeEmpowermentCh. Listen, if you're using PayPal, LEC at let-god.org. That is our PayPal account. If you want to give online, www.let-god.org is where you can make that happen. Listen, you can also, if you are the one that likes to do checks or money orders, then you see right there on the screen, that is our mailing address, so that you are able to send that information there in the mail. But listen, I just want to let you know that if this has been an investment to you, I would ask that you would turn around and be an investment to Life Empowerment Church. And so listen, I just want to thank you so much for being here, for roughing it, resolving conflicts in relationships. And listen, if you're on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Make sure you hit that bell icon. Listen, hit the like button here on the Facebook page, Life Empowerment Facebook page. And listen, remember to like, share, and to follow. If this has been enriching to you, if this has been something that has been really fulfilling and you believe that it will help somebody else, make sure that you share this with somebody. And listen, I just want to thank you so much for allowing us to have the opportunity to help maximize your relationships. Because when we learn together, we can grow together. Well, listen, this is Pastor and Therapist Marcus Ruffin. I have enjoyed my time with you today. And listen, I look forward to seeing you again on next Thursday. You be blessed.